A French diplomat during the time of Napoleon said this, that you can do a lot with bayonets, but you cannot sit on them. The idea is that eventually, if you're going to subjugate people, that you're going to have to do so with something that is not only predicated upon force, but also predicated upon pleasure, because force will only get you so far. I would dare say that the way in which many people today try to implement that subjugation is no longer simply through force, but also through something called half-truths. So somebody said one time, beware the sound of one hand clapping. And the reason for that is that one hand can't clap. So whenever you hear somebody oddly giving you half-truths and not talking about the other side of the story, then it is probably because there is a hidden agenda somewhere that is intended for deception, or they themselves are deceived. And so today we're going to talk about half-truths on the show. My name is Reed Uberman, and on Indie Thinker I try to provide Christian answers to current events, because I believe that the cure for bad ideas, and there are many of them, are good ideas, and the best ideas are found in Christian scripture. Now, before I jump into the show, I want to make sure that you like, share, and subscribe if this show is meaningful to you, and let you know that you can become a member over at indiethinker.org/support, where you can gain access to ebooks, audiobooks, movies, documentaries, and so much more that will help you take your Christian worldview to the next level. And today's show is sponsored by our friends over at Sweet and Savory Classroom. If you're looking to create healthier meals, maybe you want to have a great date night experience with your spouse, Sweet and Savory is the place to do that, and so much more. Now, even if you're not in the classroom area and you can't attend one of their cooking classes, you can go online where they have step-by-step instructions of how to make the most amazing meals that you've ever had in your life. But I guarantee you, if you are in the area, you'll never have a better date night experience than if you go see our friends over at Sweet and Savory. And it's a great way to support the show. When you support them, you're supporting us. And you can check out right now all the offerings that they have online by going to sweetandsavoryclassroom.com. And when you check out, make sure to use the promo code IndieThinker. I bet you'll never guess who said history needs a push. No, it wasn't Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You may think that because this is a Christian apologetic podcast and I talk about how Christianity impacts culture, and Bonhoeffer certainly is a quintessential example of that. And his belief that because he is a Christian pastor, he has a moral responsibility to put skin in the game and go to the ultimate degree of trying to forcibly stop Hitler in his time. But it wasn't Bonhoeffer, it wasn't Martin Luther King Jr., it wasn't the great abolitionist William Wilberforce who almost single-handedly abolished the slave trade. No, it was Vladimir Lenin. And if Lenin's disciple Stalin is any indication of this quote, well then, I think it's fair to say that it depends on the push we're talking about and depends on who is doing the pushing if this statement is to be true, because Stalin, when he started pushing in his atheistic communist revolution, it cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of people who died of starvation and tens of millions more of his own people. So yeah, when we say things, it's important to understand what we mean by them and that we take into account the counterfactuals. So we must beware, in other words, of half-truths. So it is true that history needs a push, but as we should also note, the devil is in the details, because those details need to be fleshed out. The reason I talk about this today is because half-truths are everywhere, and I spend a lot of time talking about it on the show. And this is on full display again when Donald Trump was speaking at his joint session of Congress, where he honors a little boy with brain cancer, and Democrats cannot take the time to even applaud this brave young man. Check it out.
Asking our new Secret Service Director, Sean Curran, to officially make you an agent of the United States Secret Service.
Now, for those of you who are listening and not watching, yes, that was a white female boomer Democrat, Karen, sticking her fingers in her ears and rolling her eyes as Donald Trump honors a little boy with potentially terminal brain cancer. Now, the reason they cannot stand and applaud is because they hate Donald Trump so much, but also because they are so committed to their ideology that they cannot even recognize objectively good things. So as you can see, I hope my claim before of being far too charitable, which I know really happens with me, is accurate. Because it's not only that libs and progressives do not care about reality, because truth is not a virtue of the left, but it is also that they talk a lot about love, but they do not even possess love. All they possess is ideology, agenda, and a deep-seated hatred for anybody that disagrees with him, such that they will not even stand up and honor this little boy who obviously deserves it. Now, half-truths are par for the course for these guys, and there is no greater example of this than when Gavin Newsom just recently spoke with Charlie Kirk on his podcast, because here you will see the half-truth of speaking about love, grace, and compassion is nothing less than a rhetorical tactic.
You right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports,
right.
that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out say no.
No, and I appreciate
but like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's easy to call out, the unfairness of that. There's also a humility and a grace, that these poor people are more likely to commit suicide, have anxiety and depression. And the way that people talk down to vulnerable communities is an issue that I have a hard time with as well. So both things I can hold in my hand. How can we address this issue with the kind of decency that I think, is inherent in you, but not always expressed?
Now, I might be tempted, as you are, out of grace and compassion, to give Gavin Newsom some credit here for saying that it is completely unfair for boys and men to compete in sports with females, especially when there's a competitive nature to this thing, a disadvantage that it puts girls into, and when there are things like scholarships on the line. You might be tempted to say, well, at least he's willing to say that, except for the fact that he follows up that point with the half-truth of compassion and grace. So he does that because he wants to cover up for the fact that affirming these kind of delusions are actually really, really not compassionate and have nothing graceful about them whatsoever. So let me ask the question, what would be more compassionate and graceful? To affirm delusions and to encourage young men and boys to engage in sports that they shouldn't be a part of because they, quite frankly, have a social contagion? Is that real compassion, or would it be to help them come to terms with the truth? Is it real compassion and grace to allow a man, a big one at that, to slam a volleyball into the face of a young girl, paralyzing the right side of her face and giving her a concussion? Are we supposed to believe that that's what true grace and compassion actually looks like? I think we know what we're watching. This supposed middle position has nothing to do with grace and compassion. He is merely using those words to cover up his real agenda, which is to run for election in 2028. And now he's trying to pull back some of the moderates that have been totally lost on his party because of their radical policies like this. In other words, he's using a half-truth in order to secure power for himself. But you'll see this rhetorical tactic yet again on display in this same conversation.
You signed a law where school districts can't even tell parents if their kids are trans.
Not true.
Okay,
Factually
then,
untrue.
Okay, then.
No, they can. They just can't get fired for not doing that. And it wasn't just trans.
Fired for not.
The law was explicit, said you can't be fired for not snitching on a kid, not just for being trans, for being gay. And my point is, how in the hell
but
are you
the parents know?
They have every.
Wait, is
by the way,
parents snitching?
No, the teachers themselves have the right. The law is they can do that. They can do that. We're not saying you can't do that. We're saying you shouldn't be fired if you choose not to say Johnny was talking about liking some other boy or something. That's a charitable reading.
No, that's interesting, Gavin. I noticed that what you said right there, because I have an operational brain, is a distinction without difference at all. To say that we didn't make it legal for teachers to hold back information from parents, we just said, hey, teachers, you're not going to get fired if you hold back information from parents. I hope you realize that there's zero difference between either of those things. And the reason that he's making that distinction without difference is because he's using a half-truth. Because what Gavin Newsom is doing here is what progressive Christians are very good at and what libs and progressives do all the time. They're using a rhetorical tactic called the Mott and the Bailey, and you need to be aware of it. The Mott and the Bailey functions like this. The Bailey is a big open piece of land, and it would be a position that is not easily defensible, that you would start off with, something like this. We should support Black Lives Matter because that's the best way to support Black lives. And if I came and pushed back against that initial argument and I said, well, hey, I noticed that Black Lives Matter is run by a bunch of trained Marxists and they want to destroy the Western prescribed nuclear family. And when I look at Black families and their high level of fatherlessness, I would suggest that probably one of the worst ways that you could take care of Black lives is by destroying their families when they're already in a difficult spot. Now, usually what the lib progressive will do is then retreat from the Bailey to the castle, the Mott, and then they will make a defensible position like this. So you're trying to say that we shouldn't care about Black lives? You're saying Black lives don't matter? Well, of course that's not true. Of course Black lives do matter. And if I run to the Mott with them and argue that case with them, then they've basically won the argument because they've changed the conversation entirely. And this is what libs and progressives do all the time. They're fully reliant upon half-truths. Now, the reason they do this is because they have to resort to dishonest tactics and using half-truth because their positions are so insanely radically irrational. This is why they talk a lot about love and try to convince you through blackmail and extortion that you don't love people, especially if you're an evangelical white male Christian. You don't love people if you don't fully agree with me. And of course, that's ridiculous because disagreement sometimes actually proves that you love somebody. And it is really hard to disagree with somebody, especially when you think it may cost the relationship or you may be misunderstood. That's why it's an unparalleled act of love for a Christian to push against the cultural consensus when it flies in the face of Scripture. Because for us to push against that cultural consensus means that we care enough about the individual to tell them the truth regardless of what the culture is telling them and regardless of what it will mean that you think about me. Because if we're possessed by constantly thinking about ourselves and people pleasing, we will never get to the place where we're actually willing to say something that is true. But maybe more importantly, the real reason progressives use half-truth is this, is that progressivism is broken. It is a desire to make progress even at the expense of cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's pushing against the wisdom of the past in order to achieve something that is perceived as progress. But the real problem with being a progressive and not being a Christian conservative is that when you're constantly trying to reinvent society for each new generation and pushing against the wisdom of the past, then nothing in the past is sacred. And when there is nothing that is sacred, there is nothing that you will not desecrate and violate in order to pursue your agenda. Ben Franklin said this, "Beware of half-truths because they are often cover for big lies." And the biggest lie of all is that truth is somehow a threat to an individual rather than the thing that sets them free. All right, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If the show was beneficial to you, then you will get a lot out of becoming a member over at indiethinker.org/support, where you can gain exclusive perks and extras like ebooks, audiobooks, and movies. Don't forget to check our sponsors down below, but most importantly, go with God.